In today's episode, we're diving into the most shocking safari attacks. From a woman who thought she could easily tame a lion to a lone photographer who wandered too far in Botswana. Let's begin with the first story. The morning of February 22, 2012 was unusually cool for central India, with a light mist hanging over the dense bamboo forest of Satpura Tiger Reserve. Naveen Sharma woke before his classmates, excitement making sleep impossible. At 21, he was in his final year of zoology studies at Delhi University, and this field trip to Satpura was the culmination of years of hard work and dedication. Naveen had always been the serious one in his family. From childhood, Naveen was obsessed with wildlife research, spending weekends volunteering at animal rescue centers instead of socializing with peers. His experience with sedated rescue animals had given him dangerous, false confidence about wild predator behavior. They had arrived at the reserve 3 days ago and had already documented dozens of species: spotted deer, wild boar, gore, and even a fleeting glimpse of a leopard disappearing into the underbrush. But the crown jewel of Satpura, the Bengal tiger, had eluded them so far. Tigers may be the most famous residents of Satpura, but the reserve is also home to a significant population of sloth bears, one of India's most misunderstood and dangerous mammals. Despite their name and clumsy gait, sloth bears are not true sloths but a unique species native to the Indian subcontinent. Weighing 120 to 310 pounds, they have curved claws for digging, powerful jaws to crush termite mounds, and a gap in their front teeth for sucking up insects. Sloth bears lack the submissive behavior seen in many other bear species when threatened. Instead of retreating, they often charge at perceived threats, earning them a fearsome reputation. Wildlife biologists have recorded more aggressive encounters between humans and sloth bears than with tigers, leopards, and wolves combined in areas where these species coexist. Their guide, Rajesh, explained they would be entering the bamboo thickets today, an area known for sloth bear activity, so they must stay together at all times. They set off in a single file, Rajesh leading the way with Professor Mehta close behind. The bamboo forest was unlike anything Naveen had experienced before. The tall stalks created a natural maze. The ground was carpeted with fallen leaves that muffled their footsteps. As they walked, Naveen's attention was caught by something on a tree just off the trail. Claw marks. Fresh ones. This was exactly the kind of evidence he needed for his research. He stepped off the trail for a closer look, moving just a few meters away from the group. The rest of the group continued forward, unaware that Naveen had stopped. Naveen raised his camera, focusing carefully on the claw marks. They were deeper than expected, gouging several centimeters into the bark. What Naveen failed to recognize was that these weren't just territorial markings. They were fresh-feeding signs of a female sloth bear with cubs. Sloth bears often strip bark to reach insects, and these marks were only hours old. The presence of cubs greatly increased the danger, as female bears with young are the most aggressive and unpredictable of all large mammals. So absorbed was he in his documentation that he failed to notice the subtle changes around him. The sudden silence as birds stopped calling, nature's warning signs. The female sloth bear had been foraging with her two cubs about 20 meters away. With poor eyesight but an exceptional sense of smell, she detected Naveen when the breeze shifted. To her, he was a threat to her vulnerable young, and there was no hesitation in her response. Naveen had just finished his documentation when he heard it, a deep, guttural woofing sound. The bear stood less than 5 meters away, her fur bristling and teeth bared. Behind her, two cubs scrambled up a tree. Rising onto her hind legs, she towered nearly 2 meters tall, claws extended. This posture, often mistaken for aggression, is actually a way for bears to gather information. Standing upright helps them see, smell, and assess threats. However, if the bear feels danger to herself or her cubs, this is quickly followed by a charge, often in less than a second. Naveen managed to take one step backward before his foot caught on a root. That slight movement was all it took. The bear dropped to all fours and charged. Unlike other bear species that may bluff charge or stop short, sloth bears rarely break off an attack once started. Their assaults typically focus on the face and head, a behavior believed to have evolved to counter threats like tigers and leopards, which target the neck and throat. This facial targeting makes sloth bear attacks especially devastating to humans. A scream broke through the forest, a sound of pure terror that reached the group, making everyone freeze in horror. Rajesh commanded everyone to stay put as he pulled a flare gun from his pack. He and Professor Mehta raced back down the trail toward the sound. The rest of the students huddled together in shocked silence. They found Naveen less than 100 meters back, but they were already too late. The bear was on top of him, her powerful jaws clamped onto his face, her claws tearing through his abdomen with terrible efficiency. Rajesh fired the flare gun immediately, the loud bang and bright flash startling the bear enough that she released her grip and backed away, disappearing into the bamboo to retrieve her cubs. The damage had been done. Naveen lay motionless on the forest floor, his face unrecognizable, his torso torn open. Blood soaked into the earth around him, turning the fallen leaves a deep crimson. The evacuation was a nightmare. The students, many in shock and all in tears, had to be led safely back to the ranger station while a team returned with a stretcher for Naveen's body. The forest department was notified, reports were filed, and the grim task of informing Naveen's parents fell to Professor Mehta. At Delhi University, a small memorial garden was planted in Naveen's honor, featuring native plants that attract butterflies and birds, a living tribute to a young man who had loved all forms of wildlife. August 9, 2015 was one of those dry, glittering days in northeastern South Africa where the wild seems quiet but never still. In Kruger National Park, the dust hung just above the road, stirred only by the slow roll of safari vehicles weaving through the bush. For tourists, it was a paradise. For the predators watching from the tall grass, it was just another day to wait, to watch, and sometimes to strike. Kruger is one of Africa's largest game reserves, spanning nearly 7,500 square miles of savanna, scrub, and riverine forest. It draws millions of visitors each year and is home to the Big Five: lion, leopard, elephant, rhino, and buffalo. Tour vehicles are allowed to travel near free-roaming animals on designated roads, with strict protocols in place to minimize risk. The animals are wild but habituated to the presence of vehicles, and for the most part they ignore them, until something breaks the pattern. The Marley family had arrived from Arizona 2 days earlier. Greg and Elise, both in their early 40s, had saved for nearly a decade to make this trip happen, bringing along their teenage daughter Tessa and 12-year-old son Nolan. Elise had planned every detail, down to the travel pillows and telephoto lens. It was the kind of trip people dreamed about, the kind that fills photo albums and family memories. But some trips end with photos no one wants to see again. Sifo, their guide, had given the usual safety briefing that morning: stay seated, stay quiet, and never open the windows. He'd worked in Kruger for over a decade and knew how quickly things could go wrong when even one rule was ignored. The open-sided Land Cruiser offered excellent visibility, but its sliding glass panes weren't just for comfort, they were the only thing separating tourists from the raw power just beyond the road. Just after 3 p.m., Sifo eased the vehicle to a stop near a pride of lions resting beneath a thicket of acacia trees. 6 lionesses lay stretched across the golden grass, barely stirring, while a massive male sat nearby, his dark mane catching flecks of sunlight. The only sounds were the quiet click of cameras and the hushed awe of the passengers. From the front seat, Sifo calmly reminded everyone to stay still and keep the window shut. The lions looked peaceful, but tension always simmers beneath the surface. To the untrained eye, lions may appear passive in these moments, dozing in the heat, flicking flies from their ears, seemingly indifferent to the presence of vehicles. But African lions are apex predators built for sudden, overwhelming force. A full-grown male can weigh over 420 pounds, stand nearly 4 feet tall at the shoulder, and stretch more than 10 feet from nose to tail. Their jaws can exert a bite force exceeding 650 pounds per square inch, strong enough to snap bone. Designed for ambush, they rely on stealth and short, explosive bursts of speed, capable of reaching 35 miles per hour in just a few strides. Tourists often mistake stillness for safety, but that calm can vanish in a heartbeat. A shifting camera, an outstretched arm, or the soft hiss of a sliding window can break the spell and trigger a lethal reaction. Elise, seated in the front passenger seat, had a clear view, but glare on the glass spoiled her shot. She slid the window open several inches, silently adjusting her lens. That small motion was all it took. The male lion's eyes locked onto her. He lifted his head, muscles coiled, ears forward. And then, without warning, he lunged. With a crash, he slammed against the side of the Land Cruiser, his head and one paw forcing their way through the half-open window. Elise barely had time to scream. Claws raked across her shoulder and neck. Greg reached over instinctively, trying to pull her away, but the lion had already latched on. Sifo scrambled to roll up the window, but the mechanism jammed, stuck halfway beneath the lion's weight. In the back seat, Tessa and Nolan screamed as their mother was mauled inches away. Elise struggled for only a moment before going limp, her upper body slumping against the door, one arm shredded, blood pooling rapidly across her chest and lap. The lion dropped back to the ground just as suddenly as he'd risen. The entire attack had lasted less than 10 seconds. Sifo radioed for help while Greg pressed his hands desperately against the wounds. The vehicle jolted into motion, leaving the Pride behind as other guests formed a loose perimeter on the dirt road. A medevac helicopter arrived within 20 minutes. Elise was still breathing when they lifted her from the seat, but her pulse was fading fast. After a long flight to the hospital in Nelspruit, Elise was pronounced dead. Doctors confirmed she had died from massive blood loss caused by deep lacerations to her neck and shoulder. An autopsy later revealed her injuries might have been survivable if they'd happened closer to emergency care. But out in the bush inside a moving vehicle, there simply hadn't been enough time. Kruger officials conducted a formal review and cleared Sifo of any wrongdoing. The attack was officially attributed to human error, an avoidable mistake with irreversible consequences. New warning signs were added to all tour vehicles, and rangers monitored the Pride for several days, observing no unusual behavior. In the weeks that followed, safari operators across South Africa began quietly updating their protocols. Window lock mechanisms were installed in dozens of vehicles, eliminating the possibility of opening them during predator sightings. Some companies added reinforced glass, others changed the vehicle models entirely. No one could say for certain why Elise had opened the window. She had heard the rules, Sifo had repeated them only minutes before. But that's the thing about safari. Within an hour, the wild can start to feel familiar. The lions look calm, the guide seems confident, and a metal frame between you and the wild begins to feel like enough. Maybe it was the glare on the glass, maybe she just wanted a better shot. But one small decision, to slide the window open just a few inches, was all it took. After the trip, the camera Elise had carried was boxed up and placed in a closet back home, alongside the clothes she'd worn that day. No one ever opened it. On August 23, 2018, the Okavango Delta in Botswana shimmered under the relentless African sun, temperatures soaring to 104 degrees Fahrenheit by midday. For 38-year-old Luc Moreau, a marketing executive from Lyon, France, this luxury safari represented not just a vacation, but an escape, a hard-earned pause from a relentless, fast-paced life. For nearly 2 decades, Luc had thrived in a high-pressure corporate environment known for his quick thinking, sharp instincts, and tireless work ethic. Colleagues admired him, clients trusted him, and his firm saw him as indispensable. But behind his clean-cut appearance and confident presentations was a man running dangerously low on fuel. He lived alone in a modest, minimalist apartment in Lyon's Confluence district, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Saône River. Every morning he followed the same routine: 5:30 a.m. gym sessions, black coffee, tailored suit, and a barrage of emails before the office even opened. He rarely took vacations, preferring to rack up unused leave while climbing the corporate ladder. Friends had often teased him about his workaholic streak, but Luc had always insisted he was fine, that he'd rest once things settled down. That break never came. After finalizing a major merger that had consumed 18 months of his life, Luc finally hit a wall. He began experiencing migraines, minor panic attacks, and long stretches of mental fog. His doctor had urged him to take time off. A colleague recently back from southern Africa had casually mentioned the Okavango Delta as a peaceful paradise. That same night, Luc had gone online and booked a 2-week stay at Mokolodi Delta Camp, a high-end lodge known for privacy, gourmet cuisine, and raw, unfiltered wilderness. He arrived 3 days before the incident, immediately charmed by the camp's elegant thatched roof cabins overlooking a small lake that branched off from the main delta channels. His accommodation featured an outdoor shower, a private deck, and uninterrupted views of wildlife coming to drink at the water's edge. Luc was struck by how quiet it was. No phones ringing, no buzzing notifications, no artificial urgency. He found himself sleeping longer, breathing deeper, and walking slower, finally feeling like a version of himself he hadn't known in years. During check-in, the lodge manager, Precious Ndlovu, had conducted a thorough safety briefing. She had stressed that guests should never walk unescorted after dark and that swimming in the lake was strictly prohibited due to crocodiles and hippos. Luc had nodded along, though his focus had already drifted to the elephants visible just beyond the deck. He didn't mean to be careless, he just desperately wanted to disconnect. That morning, Luc had joined 5 other guests for a 6-hour game drive led by Cabo, an experienced guide with encyclopedic knowledge of the Delta's ecosystem. The Land Cruiser had departed at 5:30 a.m., allowing them to witness a spectacular sunrise over the floodplains. By 10 a.m., they had already spotted lions lounging after a kill, a leopard draped elegantly over an acacia branch, and countless antelope species grazing on the lush vegetation. Cabo had positioned the vehicle perfectly for photographs, explaining the behavior of each animal with passionate detail. As the day heated up, Luc found himself increasingly uncomfortable. Despite the canvas roof of the safari vehicle, the sun beat down mercilessly, and his light linen shirt clung to his back with sweat. He drained his water bottle quickly, accepting a refill from Cabo's cooler. By the time they returned to the lodge at 11:30 a.m., Luc was thoroughly overheated. While the other guest headed to the dining area for lunch, he retreated to his cabin. The shower provided temporary relief, but stepping back into the humid air left him feeling sticky and uncomfortable almost immediately. From his deck, Luc gazed longingly at the lake just 164 feet from his cabin. The water looked cool and inviting, its surface glassy and still in the midday heat. He could see no signs of the dangerous animals mentioned in the safety briefing, no hippo ears protruding from the surface, no crocodiles sunning themselves on the banks. Just clear, tempting water that promised blessed relief from the oppressive heat. Luc checked his watch, 1:15 p.m. The afternoon game drive wouldn't depart until 4 p.m., leaving nearly 3 hours to kill. What he craved was solitude and coolness. He told himself it would just be a quick dip. 5 minutes in and out, no one would even notice. Decision made, Luke changed into swimming trunks and grabbed a towel. He scanned the area around his cabin. No staff members were visible in the midday heat, most likely taking their own breaks between the morning and afternoon activities. As Luke approached the water's edge, he noticed a faded sign partially obscured by vegetation. Danger, no swimming crocodiles. He hesitated briefly, then rationalized his decision. The water was clear enough that he could see the sandy bottom near the shore. Surely any large predator would be visible. Besides, he would stay inside the shallows just deep enough to submerge his overheated body briefly before returning to his cabin. At 1:22 p.m., Luke stepped into the lake, sighing with pleasure as the cool water enveloped his ankles, then his calves. The bottom was firm sand, sloping gradually deeper. He waded out until the water reached his waist, then bent his knees to submerge his shoulders. The relief was immediate and exquisite. He closed his eyes, savoring the sensation of heat leaving his body, completely unaware that his movements had already been detected. The Nile crocodile that had claimed this section of the lake as its territory was a massive specimen, nearly 16 feet long and weighing approximately 1,100 pounds. It had been resting in a reed-covered inlet about 90 feet from where Luke entered the water. Though nearly invisible with only its nostrils and eyes breaking the surface, the ancient predator had immediately sensed the vibration of Luke's entrance into its domain. Crocodiles are patient hunters, having perfected their ambush technique over 200 million years of evolution. This particular specimen began moving toward Luke with barely a ripple, its powerful tail propelling it silently through the water while its body remained completely submerged. Its cold, prehistoric brain registered only one thing: prey had entered its territory. Luke, feeling wonderfully refreshed, decided to wade a few feet deeper to fully immerse himself. The water now reached his chest as he moved parallel to the shore, unaware that death was approaching from behind at frightening speed. His first indication that something was wrong came when he noticed small fish darting away in all directions, a split-second warning that came far too late. The attack was devastatingly swift and precise. The crocodile surged forward in a final explosive burst, its massive jaws clamping around Luke's right thigh with bone-crushing force. Over 3,700 pounds of pressure per square inch, more than enough to shatter his femur instantly, closed on his flesh. Luke's scream of shock and agony echoed across the water, cut short as the crocodile executed its instinctive death roll. The predator spun violently, twisting Luke underwater in a disorienting spiral designed to tear chunks from its prey and drown it simultaneously. Water filled his lungs as he was dragged beneath the surface, his body contorting unnaturally with the force of the rotation. His fingers clawed desperately at the crocodile's armored snout, finding no purchase on the prehistoric scales. For a brief moment, the crocodile paused its rolling and Luke broke the surface, gasping and choking. He managed to scream for help before being dragged under again. On the shore, a groundskeeper who had been trimming vegetation heard the cry and looked up in horror to see the water churning violently about 200 feet from the bank. The crocodile rolled again, more powerfully this time. Underwater, Luke felt his consciousness fading as oxygen deprivation and shock took their toll. The pain in his shattered leg had become strangely distant, his body shutting down non-essential functions as it entered survival mode. In his final moments of awareness, he registered being dragged deeper into the lake, away from the shore, away from any possibility of rescue. The groundskeeper ran toward the main lodge, shouting for help. Staff quickly responded, launching a small aluminum boat used for emergency purposes. By the time Cabo and two others reached the lake center, there was nothing to see but expanding ripples and floating reeds. Luke Moreau had vanished completely, dragged to the crocodile's underwater cache, a submerged hollow in the riverbank where large prey is stored until it begins to decompose, making it easier for the reptile to tear apart. A search was immediately launched, with staff members scanning the shoreline and security personnel notifying local authorities. Lodge guests were confined to their cabins as the grim reality of what had happened became clear. Precious, the lodge manager, contacted the French embassy in Gaborone to report the incident, her voice shaking as she explained the circumstances. Luke's body was discovered nearly 24 hours later, partially submerged in a reed bed approximately 650 feet from where he had entered the water. In warmer, oxygen-rich shallows like this part of the delta, decomposition can sometimes release gases quickly enough to float a body within a day. The crocodile had consumed significant portions of his torso and right leg, leaving behind a grisly reminder of nature's brutal efficiency. A team from the Botswana Wildlife Authority captured and euthanized the crocodile responsible, a notorious specimen that local fishermen had nicknamed Old Ghost for its ability to appear and disappear without warning. Mokolodi Delta Camp temporarily closed for a comprehensive safety review, installing additional fencing around water access points and implementing hourly security patrols. Warning signs were made larger and more prominent with multilingual instructions about the lethal danger posed by the Delta's predators. It was March 9, 1996 when the Zambezi River, flowing majestically past Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe, would witness one of the most horrific hippopotamus attacks ever documented. The river, stretching 1,600 miles through southern Africa, had long been a premier destination for adventure tourism. By 1996, dozens of companies offered canoe safaris along its waters, despite the presence of over 2,000 hippopotamuses, Africa's deadliest large animal. In Africa river guiding, there are two types of guides: those who've had close calls with hippos and those who haven't yet. Heritage Safari Adventures had operated on the Zambezi since 1985, building a reputation for professional river tours. Their safety record was impeccable, thanks largely to experienced guides like Paul Temper. At 27, Paul had logged over 2,000 river trips, earning respect among fellow guides for his knowledge of hippo behavior and river dynamics. Evans Namasango represented the future of Zimbabwe's tourism industry. The 25-year-old had grown up in a village near Victoria Falls where the thunder of the cascading water had been his childhood soundtrack. Despite his family's limited means, Evans had worked tirelessly to earn his guide certification, spending every spare moment learning river navigation and wildlife behavior. His apprenticeship with Paul was his final step toward becoming a full-fledged river guide. The difference between a perfect river day and a catastrophe on the Zambezi can be measured in inches, the distance between a canoe's hull and a hippo's back. That morning, the river conditions seemed perfect. The water level was optimal for canoeing and the weather was clear with light winds. Their group consisted of 3 canoes, Paul in the lead boat with 2 American tourists, Evans in the middle with a German couple, and Mike Smith, another experienced guide, bringing up the rear with photography enthusiasts. Hippopotamuses are Africa's most dangerous large animals, responsible for hundreds of human deaths annually. Their massive bodies can weigh up to 3,000 pounds, yet they can outrun humans on land. Their jaws, capable of opening 150 degrees and delivering a bite force of 2,000 pounds per square inch, can easily crush a small boat. Most importantly, they're extremely territorial, particularly during the mating season, which coincided with that fateful day in March. By 2:30 p.m., the group had successfully navigated several challenging sections of the river. The afternoon sun illuminated the water perfectly, and their tourist had already photographed elephants drinking at the riverbank and countless water birds. The mood was relaxed as they approached a seemingly calm stretch of river about 3 miles above Victoria Falls. At 2:45 p.m., Paul noticed subtle ripples in the water ahead, a telltale sign of submerged hippos. Following standard protocol, he signaled the group to give the area a wide berth, steering toward the eastern bank. Evans, demonstrating textbook guide skills, began following Paul's lead. The attack came without warning. A massive bull hippo, later estimated to weigh over 4,000 pounds, erupted from beneath the canoe with the force of a capsizing wave. The impact sent Evans and the German tourist flying. The tourists splashed down several feet away, their panicked cries rising as they struggled in the deeper water, kicking toward the reeds along the riverbank. But Evans had landed in the worst possible place, just feet from the hippo's gaping maw. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the hippo vanished beneath the surface, the river swallowing its massive form in a swirl of foam. Paul reacted instantly, directing his tourist toward the bank before turning his canoe toward Evans. The apprentice guide surfaced 15 feet downstream, coughing and dazed, his arms flailing as the current dragged him farther from safety. Paul dug his paddle into the water, surging forward, his outstretched hand closing the distance. Then the river exploded. The hippo surfaced directly beneath Evans, lifting him clear out of the water before its jaws clamped down with bone-crushing force. A sickening crack echoed across the river as the hippo's tusks tore through flesh and muscle. The water turned red in an instant. Paul was just feet away, his paddle inches from Evans' grasp when the hippo struck again, this time slamming into Paul's canoe with devastating force. The impact sent him hurtling into the river. Before he could react, the hippo was on him. Its enormous tusks pierced his back and chest, dragging him under in a brutal display of strength. The water churned violently as the animal performed its deadly dunking behavior, submerging and surfacing with Paul caught in its grip. Mike Smith, watching from his position downstream, was already signaling for help. His quick thinking got the German tourist safely to shore, but Evans was gone. The Zambezi had swallowed him whole, the river's churning current carrying his lifeless body into the depths. During one surfacing, Paul managed to reach around the hippo's head, desperately searching for its eyes in order to claw at them and distract the animal. The animal responded by shaking him violently, eventually spitting him out. The force of being released sent Paul spinning through the water, his left arm nearly severed from his body. Emergency response teams arrived within 30 minutes, but faced the challenging terrain of the Zambezi Gorge. Paul was rushed to Victoria Falls Hospital with catastrophic injuries. His left arm was mangled beyond repair, hanging by just a few tendons. He had sustained over 40 puncture wounds, some large enough to fit a fist through. Medical professionals would later call his survival miraculous. Most hippo attack victims die within minutes. The search for Evans lasted 2 days, involving multiple rescue teams and local fishermen who knew the river's treacherous currents. His body was found 7 miles downstream, caught in river debris near the entrance to the Batoka Gorge. The autopsy revealed he had drowned after being rendered unconscious by the initial impact. The force of the hippo's strike had caused severe head trauma before he even hit the water. The investigation uncovered a pattern of warning signs that had gone unheeded. Local fishermen had reported the bull hippo's increasingly aggressive behavior in the weeks leading up to the attack. The animal had charged several fishing boats, behavior experts later identified as territorial expansion. Yet no formal system existed for sharing such crucial information among tour operators. The tragedy led to fundamental changes in Zambezi River operations. Heritage Safari Adventures worked with wildlife authorities to establish the first comprehensive hippo monitoring program. GPS tracking of known aggressive bull hippos became mandatory. Guide training was enhanced to include extensive hippo behavior recognition, and minimum distances from hippopods were doubled from 50 to 100 meters. Evans' death devastated the local guiding community, drawing hundreds to his funeral, where many spoke of his dream to establish a training school for underprivileged youth interested in river guiding. His mother's words at the memorial about his plans to open his own tour company sparked a movement within Zimbabwe's tourism industry. After months of rehabilitation and adjusting to life with one arm, Paul Temper returned to Africa with a purpose, founding the Evans Namasango Foundation to provide education and training for aspiring guides from underprivileged backgrounds. His book about the experience, What's Left of Me, became required reading for river guides worldwide. Today, the Zambezi continues to draw thousands of tourists annually, its powerful waters still offering adventure seekers the thrill of Africa's mighty river. But no canoe launches without guides first sharing Evans' story. His death led to the safest decade in Zambezi River tourism history. though the hippos remain as territorial and deadly as ever. The bull hippo responsible for the attack was never seen again, likely moving deeper into the Zambese's vast network of channels and tributaries. But its impact on river safety protocols changed Africa water-based tourism forever, a reminder that nature's most powerful creatures demand respect until the very end. The morning of June 3, 2013 broke with a spectacular African sunrise over the Okavango Delta. Golden light spilled across the wetlands, creating a photographer's dream of shadows and reflections. Andreas Keller woke before dawn in his tent. Today was the day he would finally capture the shot he'd been planning for months. At 46, Andreas had built an impressive career capturing the world's most dangerous animals in their natural habitats. The German photographer was known for his patience and his willingness to go to extraordinary lengths for the perfect shot. But there was one animal that had always eluded his lens in the way he wanted to capture it: the leopard. Not just any leopard shot, but a mother with her cubs in their den. Unlike lions, leopards are solitary hunters that come together only to mate. Female leopards raise their cubs alone. For their first 8 weeks of their lives, leopard cubs remain hidden in a den while their mother hunts. This secretive behavior makes photographing leopard families extraordinarily difficult and dangerous. Andreas had been tracking a particular female leopard for weeks. The local guides called her Shadow. He had glimpsed her several times, always from a distance, always too briefly for the intimate portrait he envisioned. The head ranger Kibo had warned him over dinner the previous night about the dangers of approaching leopards with cubs, describing them as the most dangerous animals in Africa, more dangerous than lions or buffalo because they attack without warning. He promised Kibo he would take one of the guides with him. But as the sun rose, Andreas made a fateful decision. The guides were busy with a group of tourists that morning. If he waited for them to be available, he might miss the perfect light. Besides, he reasoned, he wouldn't actually be staying near the den, just setting up the camera and leaving. He packed his equipment, the motion-activated camera, the infrared trigger, extra batteries, and memory cards. He slipped his satellite phone into his pocket and clipped his GPS tracker to his belt. The walk to the thicket took longer than expected. The morning grew hot and sweat soaked through Andreas's khaki shirt. Every step brought him closer to what could be the defining image of his career. What Andreas couldn't fully appreciate was that leopards have evolved remarkable senses to detect threats to their young. Their hearing can pick up high-frequency sounds like rodents moving underground, and their sense of smell is 14 times more sensitive than a human's. Most importantly, leopards have adapted for stealth. Their flexible shoulder blades allow them to flatten their bodies when stalking, and specialized pads on their feet silence their approach. He selected a large acacia tree about 30 yards from where he suspected the den entrance to be. Close enough for the camera to capture detail, far enough to hopefully not disturb the leopard. He moved to a second position, setting up another camera to capture a different angle. The setup was complete. Just as he was about to step away, his boot caught on an exposed root. He stumbled forward, creating more noise than intended. The forest had gone completely quiet. No bird calls, no rustling leaves. Just a heavy silence that permeated the area. Andreas hurriedly secured his last camera and began to gather his tools. When suddenly a blur of motion dropped from the branches above. There had been no growl, no rustling of leaves, no indication of the leopard's presence until the moment of attack. Leopards are one of the few big cats that regularly hunt from trees, using gravity to add force to their initial strike. They can leap up to 20 feet horizontally and 10 feet vertically, and often position themselves directly above game trails to ambush passing prey. The impact knocked Andreas flat on his stomach. The leopard's jaws clamped down on the back of his neck with crushing force. Andreas's body twisted reflexively, his arm coming up in what appeared to be an instinctive defensive motion. The leopard adjusted its attack, jaws locking around his forearm, teeth penetrating through muscle and contacting bone. The leopard released his arm only to reposition, moving to deliver another bite to the back of the neck. The cameras that Andreas had just set up captured the entire sequence, their motion sensor triggered by the sudden activity. At the ranger station, Kibo was reviewing the morning's patrol schedule when he remembered Andreas's interest in the leopard den. On a hunch, he checked the GPS tracking system, bringing him to a shock after seeing Andreas's GPS appearing in a restricted area. Kibo quickly assembled a response team and they followed the GPS signal to find Andreas's backpack, and 15 meters away, his body partially dragged beneath a bush. The leopard had started moving her kill to a safer spot, likely planning to return once the area felt secure. Kibo approached cautiously, rifle ready, but there was no need for weapons now. Andreas had become part of the life and death cycle he'd spent his career documenting. The bite on the back of his neck showed the leopard's distinct crushing bite, designed to sever the spinal cord quickly. The recovery team collected his equipment, including cameras that recorded his final moments. Reviewing the footage later, they found a striking final frame. The leopard standing over Andreas's body, her eyes reflecting the camera flash. It was a tragic yet intimate portrait of the wild leopard he had sought to capture. News of Andreas's death sent shockwaves through the wildlife photography community. Tributes poured in from colleagues and admirers around the world, many acknowledging that while his death was tragic, he died doing what he loved most, pursuing the perfect image of nature in its purest form. The leopard and her cubs were left undisturbed. As Kibo explained to park authorities, she was protecting her young. This is the law of nature, and they must respect it even when it costs them dearly. July 14, 2019 was a still, windless night in the grasslands near Kenya's Masai Mara. The heat of the day lingered long after sunset, and the sky was wide and moonless, speckled with stars that made the land below feel even darker. Around a private bush home just outside the reserve's formal boundary, the quiet was deep enough to hear insects ticking in the dry grass, and the occasional shuffle of hooves or paws in the distance. The fences were low, decorative not functional, and beyond them lay open savanna shared by tourists, scavengers, and predators alike. Inside the guest lodge, 4 American travelers were winding down from their first full day on safari. Jack and Mariah Langston, both 24, had saved for a year to make the trip happen. They'd invited their close friends Devin and Haley Boyd, both 23, to join them. Friends they'd known since college, the kind you text without thinking and make plans with on instinct. Devin was the steady one, quietly funny, always helpful. The first to carry someone's bag or check if everyone had water before a hike. He wasn't reckless, just curious, thoughtful, and eager to make the most of the experience. The lodge they'd rented came with a private chef, sweeping views, and one simple, repeated rule. After dark, no one was to go outside. Not for a walk, not for photos, not even to look at the stars. The bush at night was a different place, alive, unpredictable, and not to be underestimated. He never saw where the monkey went. The rustling didn't stop, but it had shifted, lower now, heavier, coming from just beyond the patio. Devin stepped forward, scanning the dark. It wasn't a smart decision. Everyone had heard the rules. After dark, you stay inside. Devin had heard them too, but it's easy to forget how real the danger is when the night is quiet, the lodge feels safe, and the threat doesn't look like a threat. He wasn't careless by nature, just curious. And in that moment, curiosity overruled caution. What he didn't know was that not everything outside that night was prey. Devin didn't see the hyena until it was already on him. It lunged from the side, low, fast, and without warning. its jaws locking onto his lower leg with crushing force. The impact knocked him off his feet, and within seconds he was being dragged across the stone patio, his flashlight spinning into the dark. It was a spotted hyena, common in this part of Kenya, especially near bush homes where the scent of food or people lingers into the night. Though often associated with packs, they patrol alone just as easily, moving low through the grass with almost no sound. Unlike lions or leopards, they don't roar before they strike. Their jaws are among the strongest in the mammal world, over 1,100 pounds per square inch, more than enough to snap bone. And they don't chase, they wait for an opening. Devin had just given one. The hyena's grip tore through muscle and tendon as it yanked him toward the brush, its paws kicking up dust with each step. He screamed, trying to twist free, kicking with his free leg, but the animal didn't let go. It dragged him several more feet before stopping, still locked on, breathing heavily and low. Haley burst through the door, shouting his name as panic broke into a full scream. Jack and Mariah scrambled to turn on the exterior lights while Haley grabbed a chair and hurled it in the direction of the attack. The crashing sounds and sudden brightness startled the hyena, but it wasn't until a local security staffer arrived with a high-powered flashlight and a metal baton that it finally backed off. The animal hesitated, eyes glowing in the beam, then turned and slipped into the tall grass without a sound. Devin lay motionless on the ground, his leg mangled and covered in blood, the flashlight flickering weakly a few feet away. Devin was still conscious, his leg had been torn open from knee to ankle. Muscle was exposed, tendons shredded, and 2 bones were fractured. Staff applied a pressure dressing while others tried to keep him calm. A medevac helicopter arrived from Nairobi before dawn. He was flown out, stabilized, and underwent emergency surgery just after sunrise. Doctors managed to save the leg, but not its full function. After multiple operations and months of physical therapy, Devin regained the ability to walk with assistance, but nerve damage left him with chronic pain, limited mobility, and a permanent limp. The incident sparked a brief investigation by the Bush Homes management, but no violations were found. The safety protocol had been clear, and the responsibility lay with the guest who stepped outside. No legal action was taken, and the lodge quietly increased its nighttime staffing and reinforced the perimeter. Back in California, Devin's life changed in ways he hadn't expected. His job in outdoor recreation became impossible. He moved into a remote customer service role and started physical therapy full-time. He and Haley married in a quiet local ceremony. Jack and Mariah still travel, but they no longer book trips to remote wildlife areas. The experience left them deeply shaken. The lodge updated its nighttime procedures and increased staffing, but the official safety policy remained unchanged. Guests are responsible for following the rules. Devin's decision to step outside that night left him with permanent injuries and changed the course of his life in a matter of seconds. It was August 15, 2011, when the Serengeti National Park would witness one of its most tragic tourist incidents. The vast African wilderness, spanning 5,700 square miles across Tanzania's northern plains, represents one of Earth's last great wildlife sanctuaries. By 2011, the park hosted over 150,000 visitors annually, drawn by its spectacular concentration of predators, particularly its 3,000-strong lion population, the largest in Africa. For safari operators, 2011 marked a record year for tourism. 27 companies ran daily game drives through the park, their modified land cruisers carrying tourists from luxury lodges into the heart of predator territory. Tanzania Adventure stood among the most respected, with a 15-year-old perfect safety record and a fleet of 12 specially equipped vehicles. The Wilson family from Portland, Oregon, represented typical upper-middle-class American tourists. Haley, 42, taught 3rd grade at Richmond Elementary. Her husband, Robert, 45, had recently made senior accountant at Deloitte's Portland office. Their daughters, Emily, 10, and Sarah, 8, attended Westbrook Private School, where news of their upcoming African adventure had made them minor celebrities among their classmates. Unlike many families who chose Disney World or Hawaiian beaches, the Wilsons had spent 5 years saving for something extraordinary. Their previous vacations had never ventured beyond California's borders. This $15,000 investment represented their first international trip, carefully researched through months of reading safari blogs and TripAdvisor reviews. Robert's preparation was meticulous. He bought a Canon EOS 7D specifically for wildlife photography, attended 3 photography workshops, and read every Serengeti guidebook available. Haley had upgraded to the iPhone 4, eager to document their journey. The girls received new binoculars for Christmas, practicing their wildlife spotting at Portland Zoo. Their guide, Daniel Mkapa, had led safaris for 12 years without incident. His modified Toyota Land Cruiser 70 series featured elevated seating and a pop-top roof for photography. Standard safety rules applied. Passengers were instructed to remain seated at all times and keep all limbs inside the vehicle. By 8:15 a.m., they encountered their first pride of lions. Daniel cut the engine 50 yards from where 2 adult females and their cubs were resting after a morning hunt. As the family watched in awe, Daniel explained the incredible capabilities of these apex predators. Their muscular bodies weighing up to 400 pounds could accelerate from 0 to 35 miles per hour in seconds. Their bite force exceeds 1,000 pounds per square inch, enough to crush a buffalo's spine. Most importantly, they were ambush predators, masters of staying hidden until the perfect moment to strike. The next hour was spent following the pride, maintaining a safe distance as other safari vehicles joined them in a loose semicircle. The lions seemed unbothered by their audience, the cubs playfully wrestling while their mothers kept watchful eyes on the vehicles. Around 9:20 a.m., the pride settled under a sprawling acacia tree approximately 40 yards from their vehicle. The morning heat was building, and the lions had found a perfect spot of shade. 2 cubs were playfully batting at each other while their mothers lounged nearby, keeping a watch on the vehicles but seemingly unbothered. The scene was picture perfect, the kind of moment wildlife photographers dream about capturing. For the past 20 minutes, Haley had wrestled with the limitations of her iPhone 4's camera. The lions were right there, close enough to see every ripple of muscle beneath their tawny coats, every flick of their tails, but through her screen they looked like distant smudges. She glanced at the tourist in the nearby vehicle, their long camera lenses clicking away, and then at her husband, his own hefty camera raised as he captured every detail with ease. Even without seeing their screens, she knew their shots were crisp, detailed, exactly what she wanted. If only she could get just a little closer. Haley, known among friends and family for her fearless nature and sometimes reckless confidence, decided to get a closer look. Whether it was the adrenaline rush from being so close to Africa's apex predators, the frustration of her iPhone 4's limited zoom capability, or simply the kind of overconfidence that comes from watching seemingly docile lions for over an hour, she made a decision that would cost her life. She reached for the latch but hesitated. Windows weren't supposed to be opened. Ignoring the rules, she slid it open anyway and leaned out slightly for a better angle. Her focus was on the screen, adjusting the frame, trying to capture the cub's playful pose. The lioness, however, had never stopped watching. In a blur of muscle and power, one of the lionesses launched herself from the shade, covering the distance in seconds. Before anyone could react, the massive predator reared onto its hind legs, its powerful front jaws slamming against the open window frame. Haley barely had time to gasp before the lioness's powerful jaws clamped onto her neck with terrifying precision. The force crushed her cervical vertebrae instantly, severing a major artery. Blood spattered across the vehicle's interior as Haley let out a gurgled cry before going limp in the lioness's grip. Daniel reacted instantly, slamming the vehicle into reverse while reaching for his rifle. Robert lunged toward Haley, but the lioness was already pulling back. Daniel fired a warning shot into the air, startling the lioness momentarily, but the damage had been done. Haley's lifeless body slumped partially out of the window, her iPhone tumbling to the floor, still recording. Emily and Sarah screamed in terror as the lioness released Haley and retreated with a low growl, blood dripping from its jaws. The other lioness remained close, eyes locked onto the vehicle as if expecting another opportunity. Emergency response teams arrived within 20 minutes, but it was far too late. Haley's injuries were catastrophic. Death had been almost instantaneous from massive blood loss and spinal trauma. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the safari industry. Investigations confirm that while the Wilsons' vehicle had followed all park regulations, the incident underscored the importance of strict adherence to safety rules. Tourists were reminded that even a seemingly harmless action like opening a window could have fatal consequences in predator territory. The park authorities faced a difficult decision. The lioness, now having killed a human, was deemed too dangerous to remain near tourist areas. It was euthanized, and its cubs were relocated to a different area of the park. The trauma inflicted on the Wilson family was profound. 10-year-old Emily developed severe PTSD, requiring years of therapy. Sarah had recurring nightmares about big cats. Robert, haunted by the memory of those few seconds of distraction, never returned to Africa. Haley's death led to even stricter safety protocols. Guides were instructed to emphasize the absolute necessity of keeping windows closed, and warning signs were reinforced inside all vehicles. Her tragic death serves as a stark reminder that in the African wilderness, even a moment's lapse in judgment can lead to a terrifying final affliction. The Serengeti's beauty remains undiminished, but its dangers demand constant respect, a lesson the Wilson family learned at an unimaginable cost. October 3, 2017 began like many others in northern Botswana, hot, dry, and quiet. In the Savuti region of Chobe National Park, the air hung heavy over the dry riverbed where elephant tracks crisscrossed the dust and lion prints lingered from the night before. It was the kind of place where silence carried weight, where the line between observer and observed could shift in a heartbeat. Etienne Ravoux had flown in from Lyon, France for what he called the trip of a lifetime. At 44, he was a civil engineer by trade and a wildlife photographer by passion. Self-taught, meticulous, and endlessly patient. He was known for his quiet curiosity, his habit of losing hours to a single detail, and his deep respect for the natural world. His wife Claire had stayed behind, trusting her husband's careful research and planning. Etienne had studied everything. Camera placement, animal habits, migration charts. But there's a difference between reading about predators and standing in their shadow. The Savuti region is known for its dry, unpredictable terrain and fiercely territorial wildlife. Big cats roam the bushveld here, especially leopards and lions. Those sightings are rare without a trained guide. The landscape is open but deceptive. Dense shrubs and shallow gullies hide movement until it's too late to react. And although most animals in national parks are native, rumors of exotic species from nearby private reserves, smuggled, escaped, or illegally kept, surface now and then, especially near the fringes. Etienne had hired a local ranger named Tiro to escort him on foot photography excursions. They had spent 3 days tracking known predator routes, staying close to the vehicle and following park guidelines. But on the 4th day, just before sunset, Etienne caught a flicker of movement in the brush near the riverbed. A flash of orange, a shape too large, too striped to be anything else. He stopped walking, lifted his camera, and without a word stepped away from the guide and followed it. Tiro called out for him to stop, but Etienne didn't hear or didn't listen. He crept through the grass, crouched low with his camera raised, scanning the edge of the bush. His focus narrowed completely on the figure ahead. He could never have guessed what was approaching from the side. In the days leading up to that moment, Etienne had been tracking what he believed might be a tiger. An animal not native to Africa, but rumored to have been seen near the southern edge of Chobe. Some speculated it had escaped from a nearby private collection that had since closed. Most dismissed the sightings as confusion or exaggeration, but Etienne had done his research and believed it was possible. For him, it was a rare photographic opportunity, one worth following. Even outside their native range, tigers remain instinct-driven predators. A full-grown adult can weigh over 500 pounds and move with near-silent precision. They stalk through cover and rarely approach head-on, preferring to circle and strike from the side. And for a photographer focused on the brush ahead, the real danger often comes from the direction he isn't looking. The tiger burst from the underbrush and hit Etienne from behind, knocking him face first into the dirt. Its claws tore across his back and thigh as it landed. He screamed and twisted, kicking wildly, but the animal had already latched onto his leg. Bone cracked audibly. The camera hit the ground and shattered. The tiger dragged him several feet through the dust before releasing him and circling again, tail twitching, breathing heavy. Tiro had already radioed for help. Locals from a nearby research outpost heard the cries and rushed in with noise deterrents, metal canisters, whistles, and flares. The tiger backed off as they approached, fading into the brush as silently as it had arrived. Etienne was bleeding heavily, his leg mangled nearly beyond recognition, but he was still conscious when they reached him. He was carried back to the vehicle, stabilized, and driven to a ranger station several miles away where he was airlifted to a hospital in Mon. By the time he arrived, he had lost a dangerous amount of blood and required immediate surgery. Doctors managed to save his life, but not his leg. Surgeons were forced to amputate above the knee. The wounds were too extensive, tendons severed, arteries crushed, and infection already setting in. As news reached France, Claire flew in to be by his side, arriving just before his second surgery. She stayed with him through the long, painful days of recovery, helping him navigate the shock and the silence that followed. After 2 weeks in the hospital, they flew home together. Friends back in Lyon were stunned. Etienne was known as methodical and intensely well prepared, never careless, never impulsive. Many had seen his research notebooks and listened to his detailed plans before the trip. The idea that he had strayed alone into the bush, ignoring his guide, felt unrecognizable. According to those closest to him, he rarely spoke about what happened, only that he had made a mistake. Officials reviewed the incident and confirmed that Tiro had followed protocol. The park issued no penalties but began distributing updated safety briefings to independent travelers and amateur photographers. New signage was posted around Savoudi's southern perimeter, and reports of exotic species were investigated more aggressively. No trace of the tiger was ever found again. On the afternoon of August 2015, the skies over Limpopo province hung heavy with the promise of rain across the private game reserve where Carla Meyer had dedicated the last 15 years of her life. Carla wasn't just any tour guide. At 41, she had built a reputation in South Africa's wildlife community as someone who possessed an exceptional understanding of big cat behavior. Her colleagues respected her expertise, but privately worried about her growing confidence around the predators, especially Shumba. Shumba wasn't just any lion to Carla. Growing up on a cattle farm, Carla had always been the one to bottle feed orphaned calves, developing an unshakable belief that love could overcome nature's wildness. When she arrived at the reserve 15 years ago, she was escaping a painful divorce and the loss of her own chance at motherhood. Shumba's arrival as an orphaned cub filled that void. Those late nights bottle feeding him created a maternal bond that transcended professional boundaries. When the reserve changed management, new safety protocols were implemented. No handler was to enter a predator's enclosure alone, no exceptions. But Carla saw these rules as unnecessary for her relationship with Shumba. She began finding ways to circumvent the protocols, creating excuses to be alone with her lion. The other handlers knew, but most looked the other way out of respect for her experience. Carla insisted that Shumba needed his space during feeding time and that too many people made him anxious. The new management reluctantly granted her special permission to continue working closely with Shumba, though they insisted on CCTV monitoring during these sessions. Carla agreed, confident that nothing would ever go wrong. That fateful August afternoon, Carla arrived at Shumba's enclosure with his usual meal, 20 pounds of raw meat in a steel feeding bowl. She entered the main enclosure. This was her favorite part of the day, just her and Shumba. Carla failed to recognize that even captive lions retain their predatory instincts. Male lions mature around 3, becoming more aggressive and territorial. Over recent weeks, Shumba's body language had subtly changed. His tail flicked more agitatedly and his ears were more forward and alert when she approached. Lions communicate primarily through body language, and Shumba had been signaling a shift in his comfort level that went unheeded. She set the bowl down in the usual spot and stepped back, watching as Shumba approached. As Shumba began to eat, Carla did something she'd done hundreds of times before. She sat down nearby. She never approached him while he was eating, knowing that even domesticated cats can be territorial around food. But today, she noticed the bowl was at an awkward angle. She leaned forward to adjust the steel bowl for him. In the monitoring room, a junior handler was watching the CCTV feed. He saw Carla reach toward the feeding bowl. He dropped his pan and grabbed the radio, but it was already too late. Shumba's head snapped toward Carla with lightning speed. In one fluid motion, his massive jaws clamped around her forearm. The handler watched in horror as the lion yanked Carla to the ground with shocking force. He shouted into the radio, calling for emergency backup, alerting everyone about the situation. Carla was just adjusting Shumba's bowl. The next, she was on the ground, blood now filling her mouth. The lion she had raised from a cub, the animal she trusted more than most humans. She gasped his name as she tried to make eye contact with the lion. But the lion before her wasn't the gentle giant she had raised. His eyes were cold, predatory, completely void of recognition. He released her mangled arm with a sickening crunch, blood streaming down her fingers. Without pause, he lunged for her throat, his 400 pounds of muscle and bone slamming her to the ground with devastating force. His massive paws pinned her shoulders, claws digging through fabric and into skin. When lions attack, they typically target the neck or throat of their prey, an instinctive behavior designed to quickly incapacitate victims by cutting off air supply or severing major blood vessels. The emergency response team arrived at the enclosure 3 minutes after the handler's call, but they were already too late. The blast from the fire extinguishers drove Shumba back long enough for 2 handlers to drag Carla's body toward the gate, while others kept the lion at bay. But it was far too late. The damage to her throat and upper chest was catastrophic. Despite the medical team's desperate efforts, she was pronounced dead at the scene, her body covered with a simple canvas tarp as the rain finally began to fall. In the days that followed, the reserve was closed to visitors. Shumba was euthanized under the reserve's fatal attack policy, despite protest from some who argued that he was just acting on instinct. Carla's family requested privacy, but released a statement asking that people remember her for her passion and dedication to wildlife conservation, not for the manner of her death. On July 17, 2022, the Serengeti National Park in Tanzania was experiencing perfect safari weather. Clear skies, moderate temperatures, and wildlife activity at its peak. For 54-year-old Klaus Bergman, a retired engineering professor from Munich, this trip represented the culmination of a lifelong dream. His partner Elise Weber, 51, had surprised him with the safari for his birthday after years of watching wildlife documentaries together in their modest apartment overlooking the Isar River. Klaus had always been methodical and deeply curious, the kind of man who filled shelves with neatly labeled binders of technical journals long after retirement. Reserved but quietly passionate, he developed a love for African wildlife during his university years when he attended a guest lecture on predatory ecology. Ever since, lions and elephants had fascinated him, not just for their strength, but for the precision and intelligence behind their behavior. Elise, on the other hand, was the more intuitive and emotionally attuned of the two. She had worked as a school librarian for nearly 2 decades and had a quiet charm that made children instinctively trust her. While Klaus absorbed technical manuals, Elise favored poetry and memoirs. She was content to let Klaus lead when it came to planning trips or researching camera gear, preferring instead to savor the moment and document their journeys in handwritten travel diaries. They lived in Heidhausen, a historic neighborhood in Munich, in a 3rd-floor flat filled with houseplants, old travel books, and framed photographs from previous adventures across Europe and Asia. The Serengeti trip was meant to be their first and perhaps only adventure into the wild heart of Africa. It wasn't just a vacation, it was a shared milestone, a tribute to everything they had built together over 19 years. What they didn't realize, what no one ever does, is that this would be the last trip they ever take together. Just one more walk, one more morning without knowing it was the end. Klaus had meticulously prepared for this journey, purchasing a Canon EOS R5 specifically for wildlife photography, attending 3 photography workshops, and reading every Serengeti guidebook available. His backpack contained extra memory cards, lens filters, and a notebook where he'd been documenting every species they encountered. The couple had saved for 3 years to afford this premium walking safari experience, choosing Authentic Africa expeditions for their stellar safety record and small group sizes. Their guide, Joseph Makundi, had led walking safaris for 15 years without incident. That morning, he had conducted the standard safety briefing at the luxury tented camp where the group of 6 tourists had spent the night. He emphasized the importance of staying together, warned against wandering off, and made it clear that in the event of predator encounters, guests were to remain still and follow his instructions without hesitation. He looked each person in the eye as he spoke, silently confirming their understanding. The walking safari had begun at 6:30 a.m., with Joseph leading the way through golden grasslands dotted with acacia trees. By mid-morning, the group had already spotted zebras, giraffes, and a distant herd of elephants. Klaus was ecstatic, his excitement barely containable as he whispered his amazement to Elise. This moment was surpassing everything he had ever imagined. Around 11:15 a.m., the group paused near a small watering hole where a family of warthogs was drinking cautiously. While Joseph was explaining the ecosystem to the other tourists, Klaus noticed a beautiful yellow-billed hornbill perched on a branch about 164 feet away, and in a hushed tone, drew Elise's attention to it. He was eager to capture it, the kind of shot he had envisioned for years. Without alerting Joseph, Klaus and Elise quietly stepped away from the group, moving toward the hornbill with careful, measured steps. Klaus was so focused on framing the perfect photograph that he failed to notice how far they had strayed from the main group. After capturing several shots of the bird, Klaus suggested they return to the group by following what looked like a game trail curving around a cluster of bushes. He was confident that they could rejoin from the other side and reassured Elise, who was beginning to show signs of worry. What Klaus couldn't know was that they had wandered into one of the most dangerous situations possible on an African safari. Hidden in the tall grass beyond the bushes, a lioness was watching her 3 cubs play. The path Klaus and Elise had chosen would place them directly between the mother and her young, a position that would trigger the most primal protective instincts in any predator. At 11:27 a.m., as they rounded the bushes, Elise was the first to notice movement in the grass. 3 lion cubs playing near the bushes. Alarm crept into her voice as she urgently warned Klaus, clutching his arm. She wanted to turn back immediately. Klaus instinctively raised his camera, his photographer's instinct briefly overriding the sense of danger. He muttered something about taking one last shot, already adjusting his lens. The attack came without warning. The lioness, having spotted the humans approaching her vulnerable cubs, launched herself from the hidden position in the grass. She covered the 98 feet between them in mere seconds, a blur of muscle and deadly intent. Klaus barely had time to lower his camera before 180 kilograms of apex predator slammed into him with devastating force. The impact knocked Klaus backwards, his camera flying from his hands as he crashed to the ground. The lioness's powerful jaws clamped down on his neck, a killing technique perfected over millions of years of evolution. Her canines, designed to sever the spinal cords of zebras and wildebeests, easily penetrated Klaus's flesh. Elise's screams echoed across the savannah as she watched in horror. The lioness shook Klaus violently, the way these predators typically kill their prey. His body went limp almost immediately as the bite crushed his trachea and severed his carotid artery. Blood soaked into the parched earth beneath him. The lioness released Klaus momentarily, her instincts telling her to check on her cubs. In that brief pause, she noticed Elise, who had fallen to her knees in shock. Then the predator turned toward the second potential threat, her blood-stained muzzle low to the ground, muscles tensed for another attack. Elise, paralyzed with fear, could only watch as the lioness approached her with deliberate steps. The predator was just 9 feet away when a sharp crack split the air, a warning shot from Joseph's rifle. The lioness hesitated, torn between protecting her cubs and facing this new threat. Joseph had heard the growl in the distance and sprinted toward the scene, rifle in hand. As he closed the distance, he fired again, louder and closer this time. The lioness, caught between maternal instinct and the advancing danger, snarled but began to back away. Muscles still coiled, she lingered for a tense pause, then turned toward her cubs and slipped into the tall grass, disappearing almost as quickly as she had appeared. The aftermath unfolded with grim efficiency. Joseph radioed for emergency assistance while attempting to comfort a hysterical Elise, who had sustained deep lacerations to her legs from falling onto thorny brush during the attack. Klaus lay motionless on the blood-soaked ground, his eyes open but unseeing. The medical team that arrived 30 minutes later could only confirm what Joseph already knew. Klaus Bergman had died almost immediately from catastrophic trauma to his neck and spine. The incident sent shockwaves through Tanzania's tourism industry. An official investigation was launched by the Tanzanian Wildlife Authority, focusing on whether safety protocols had been followed. While the guide was found to have delivered the standard briefing, the decision to allow the group to split, however briefly, was flagged as a critical failure. Authentic Africa Expeditions responded by overhauling its procedures. Guests were now required to wear GPS trackers during all walking safaris, and an additional ranger was assigned to shadow every group from a distance. The tragedy also prompted new national guidelines discouraging off-path detours, even for photography. The morning of April 7, 2015 dawned bright and clear over the small village nestled along the banks of the Luangwa River in Zambia. The air was filled with the sounds of birds calling to one another. Moses Chisango woke with the sun. At 14, he was already taking on the responsibilities of a young man in his community. He helped his father with fishing, assisted his mother with chores, and most importantly, looked after his 9-year-old sister, Zira. Moses was a serious boy with a quick mind. His teachers at the local school often remarked that he could go far if given the opportunity. He excelled at mathematics and science, dreaming of one day becoming a doctor who could help his village. Zira was his opposite in many ways, spirited and carefree with a smile that could charm even the sternest elder in the village. She collected colorful stones and feathers, creating little treasures that she kept in a wooden box under her bed. The village had grown alongside a popular safari lodge that attracted tourists from around the world to experience the wildlife of the Luangwa Valley. The relationship was symbiotic. Many villagers worked at the lodge, which also supported the local school and clinic. Their mother, Nakunda, warned them almost daily to stay away from the river. She would remind them that the crocodiles were hungry and clever. Nile crocodile is one of Africa's most successful predators, unchanged for 85 million years. Adults usually grow between 11 and 16 feet long and can weigh up to 1,650 pounds. With a bite force of 5,000 pounds per square inch, the strongest of any animal, they are 10 times more powerful than a great white shark. Moses understood the danger. Safari guides warned tourists that these massive reptiles could hold their breath for up to 2 hours, waiting motionless for the perfect moment to strike. With eyes, ears, and nostrils on the top of their heads, they can remain nearly submerged while keeping watch. Most chillingly, they possess unmatched patience, sometimes observing potential prey for days before attacking. On this particular April morning, with school closed for a local holiday, the temptation of adventure proved too strong to resist. Zira wanted to go to the river to find more flat stones that skip across the water. Moses knew the dangers, but they had done this multiple times before. Whenever they go out to find rocks, Zira would always stay at the high bank, away from the waters. Their mother was visiting a sick relative in a neighboring village and wouldn't return until evening. Their father was working at the safari lodge, helping to repair one of the guest cabins. The children left a note saying they were going to play near the big baobab tree, not exactly a lie, but not the full truth either. The walk to the river took about 20 minutes. The Luangwa River had a pod of hippos, mostly submerged, with just their eyes, ears, and nostrils visible above the surface. What the children couldn't see were the predators that made this river one of the most densely populated crocodile habitats in Africa. Moses led his sister to a spot on the high bank where they could hang out while looking for rocks. Zira was intensely looking for skipping stones while Moses kept watch and also looked for rocks. But something caught Zira's eyes, a rock near the water's edge. She went near it. Suddenly, the river exploded in a splash and a massive crocodile lunged with terrifying speed. It clamped around Zira's leg, causing a sharp sound. Crocodiles strike with astonishing speed, up to 20 miles per hour in water, using their powerful tails to propel forward. Zira's scream of terror and pain tore through the peaceful morning. Moses watched in horror as his sister was yanked off her feet, the crocodile already beginning its death roll, the instinctive spinning motion that crocodilians use to dismember prey too large to swallow whole. Moses dropped his rocks and without hesitation he ran to grab his sister, forgetting the dangers that were in the waters. The crocodile had dragged Zira several meters from shore, but the water was still shallow enough for Moses to reach them. Momentarily, the crocodile released its grip on Zira's mangled leg, and she began to crawl desperately toward the shore, leaving a trail of blood in the water. Moses tried to help her. But the momentary victory was shattered by a second eruption from the water. Another crocodile, even larger than the first, had been attracted by the commotion and the scent of blood. This one targeted Moses, its massive jaws closing around his torso with crushing force. The first crocodile returned to Zira, who was now barely conscious from blood loss and shock. It reclaimed its prey, dragging her in the opposite direction from her brother. On the riverbank above, 2 workers from the safari lodge had heard the screams and came running. They arrived just in time to witness the horrific scene below. 2 massive crocodiles disappearing into deeper water, each with a child in its jaws. Hours later, as the sun began to set, the search teams made their grim discoveries. The children's bodies were found separately, washed up on a sandbank downstream. The village mourned deeply. Their mother and father were deeply heartbroken. The safari lodge closed for 3 days out of respect, and the manager announced that they would fund a new fence along the most dangerous stretches of the river near the village. It was August 24, 2014, when Zimbabwe's Hwange National Park would witness one of Africa's most heroic and tragic lion encounters. for Quinn Swales, a 40-year-old professional guide, what started as a routine walking safari would end in an act of ultimate sacrifice. By 2014, Hwange National Park had established itself as Zimbabwe's crown jewel of wildlife tourism. Spanning 14,650 square kilometers of northwestern Zimbabwe, the park housed over 500 species of animals, including Africa's largest population of wild dogs and 4 of the Big Five: elephant, lion, leopard, and buffalo. The park had recently gained international attention, though for tragic reasons. Just weeks earlier, the killing of Cecil, a beloved 13-year-old male lion, by American dentist Walter Palmer, had sparked global outrage and cast a shadow over the park's conservation efforts. Quinn Swales represented a rare breed of wildlife professional. After spending his early career as a commercial pilot in northern Zimbabwe, he had traded the cockpit for the bush, finding his true calling among Hwange's dangerous beauty. His transition to professional guide wasn't just a career change, it was a spiritual journey. Over 12 years, he had developed an almost supernatural ability to read animal behavior, track wildlife, and keep his clients safe in one of Africa's most unpredictable environments. Camp Hwange, where Quinn worked, had built its reputation on providing authentic walking safaris, a far cry from the relative safety of vehicle-based game drives. These on-foot encounters offered tourists an intimate connection with Africa's wildlife, but they also carried inherent risks that demanded absolute expertise from guides. That fateful morning began like countless others at Camp Hwange. Quinn arrived at the guide station at 5 a.m., reviewing weather conditions and recent wildlife movements. His group of 6 guests, 2 American couples and a pair of German photographers, gathered for their safety briefing at 5:30 a.m. Walking safaris demanded strict protocols, single-file formation, absolute silence when required, and immediate compliance with guide instructions. By 6:15 a.m., as dawn's first light painted the savanna in soft gold, Quinn led his group into the wilderness. The morning air carried a typical late winter chill, around 54 degrees Fahrenheit, perfect for both wildlife activity and on-foot tracking. His rifle, a .458 Winchester Magnum, stayed ready but unthreatening across his shoulder, a last resort he hoped never to use. The pride they were about to encounter was well known to Quinn. Led by Anaxa, a magnificent 8-year-old male, it consisted of 2 adult females and 2 cubs, approximately 4 months old. When male lions first appeared in Quinn's binoculars that morning, they represented everything lethal about Africa's apex predators. Adult males can weigh up to 225 kilograms, with muscles comprising 60% of their body mass, more than any other big cat. Their bite force exceeds 1,000 pounds per square inch, enough to crush a buffalo's skull. Most importantly, they're highly territorial, viewing any intrusion as a potential threat. At 6:45 a.m., Quinn spotted the first tracks. Fresh paw prints in the sandy soil told a clear story. The pride had passed through less than an hour earlier. His trained eye noted subtle details, the depth of the impressions indicating the lions were walking slowly, likely after a successful hunt. The tracks led toward a favorite resting spot, a slightly elevated area where the pride often lounged during early morning hours. The group moved with practiced precision. Quinn had positioned his clients perfectly, the morning sun behind them, wind in their faces to prevent their scent from reaching the pride. At 7:10 a.m., they first spotted the lions of the pride, approximately 100 meters away across an open savanna. The scene was picture perfect. Anaxa's massive frame stretched out on a termite mound, his dark mane backlit by the rising sun, while females and cubs lay scattered in the golden grass. What happened next would challenge everything Quinn knew about lion behavior. Anaxa's initial response seemed routine, a territorial display Quinn had witnessed dozens of times before. The lion rose slowly, his muscles rippling beneath his tawny coat, but something in his body language triggered Quinn's instincts. The lion's ears weren't just forward, they were pinned aggressively. His tail, usually relaxed during warning displays, was rigid with tension. At 7:15 a.m., Anaxa began his approach. Quinn immediately implemented standard safety protocols, positioning himself between the lion and his clients. His voice remained calm as he instructed the group to stand perfectly still. When the lion breached the 164 feet safety threshold, Quinn deployed his bear banger, a specialized noise deterrent that usually sent even the most curious lions retreating. For a moment, it seemed to work, and Oxa turned away, appearing to lose interest. The group maintained their position, hearts pounding but disciplined. Then, without warning, the lion spun and charged. The attack demonstrated the terrifying efficiency of Africa's apex predator. Inoxa covered 164 feet in less than 3 seconds, his 500-pound frame moving with explosive power. Quinn had no time to raise his rifle. Instead, he stood his ground, becoming a human shield between the charging lion and his clients. His last act was one of pure sacrifice. The impact was devastating. Inoxa's initial strike knocked Quinn backwards with the force of a speeding car. The lion's massive paws, each equipped with retractable claws designed for bringing down buffalo, struck Quinn's chest and shoulders. Within seconds, the predator's powerful jaws clamped down on Quinn's neck, a killing technique perfected over millions of years of evolution. The group's shouts echoed across the savannah as blood stained the golden grass. Park rangers monitoring the walking safari from a distant ridge immediately radioed for emergency support, but in Hwange's vast wilderness, help was precious minutes away. By the time the response team arrived at 7:45 a.m., Quinn had already succumbed to his injuries. Inoxa had retreated to his pride, leaving behind Zimbabwe's most experienced guide, lying lifeless just yards from the animals he had dedicated his life to protecting. The attack lasted precisely 47 seconds. After the initial strike and neck bite, Inoxa maintained his grip for nearly 30 seconds, his powerful jaws crushing with over 1,000 psi of force. The 6 clients, following their guide's earlier instructions, had retreated 60 feet back, maintaining formation despite their terror. 2 German photographers continued filming, footage that would later prove crucial to the investigation. At 7:23 a.m., Inoxa suddenly released Quinn, responding to the approaching sounds of the pride's cubs. The lion stood over Quinn's motionless body for several moments, a behavior experts later identified as territorial dominance display, before returning to his pride approximately 260 feet away. The emergency response mobilized rapidly but faced Hwange's challenging terrain. Head Ranger Thomas Moyo received the distress call at 7:24 a.m. Within 2 minutes, 3 emergency vehicles were dispatched across the park. A medical response team rushed from main camp, fighting their way across 11 miles of rugged terrain. A wildlife response unit deployed from Cinematella Station 7.5 miles to the north, while a helicopter medical unit lifted off from Victoria Falls, racing to cover the 56-mile distance. The clients, still maintaining their position, were evacuated by the first response vehicle at 7:38 a.m. Dr. Sarah Matthews, the park's chief medical officer, reached Quinn at 7:45 a.m. but could only confirm what the rangers already knew. The combination of blood loss from the severed carotid artery and catastrophic spinal trauma had caused almost instantaneous death. The investigation revealed crucial details about the attack. Inoxa was a known pride male, wearing a tracking collar similar to the one Cecil had worn. The lion had been monitored by park authorities for years, though no previous aggressive incidents toward humans had been reported. Game cameras showed the pride had been in the area for several days, with 2 females, 2 males, and 2 cubs establishing their territory near popular walking safari routes. Quinn's death sparked intense debate about walking safari protocols across Zimbabwe's national parks. While the practice of on-foot game viewing had been a cornerstone of African tourism, this incident highlighted its inherent dangers. Camp Hwange temporarily suspended walking safaris while conducting a thorough review of their safety procedures. The park authorities faced a difficult decision regarding Inoxa. Unlike incidents involving problem animals or human settlements, this attack had occurred in the lion's natural territory during a sanctioned safari activity. The decision was made to leave the pride undisturbed, a recognition that wild animals, even those habituated to human presence, remain unpredictable. Today, Quinn Swale's legacy lives on through enhanced safety protocols and guide training across Zimbabwe. Walking safaris continue, but with stricter regulations about pride territories and pride composition. His sacrifice led to the establishment of new guidelines for approaching lions on foot, particularly when cubs are present. Inaksa and his pride continue to roam Hwange's vast wilderness, a reminder of nature's raw power. Quinn's last Facebook post, fittingly, was a photo of Cecil the lion, two creatures whose stories, though vastly different, changed Hwange forever. His death serves as a testament to the courage of Africa's professional guides, and a reminder that the continent's great predators command respect until the very end. The morning of July 30th, 2018 broke over Tsavo East National Park with a spectacular African sunrise. Elise Van Wyck woke in her small cabin at the safari camp. At 34, the South African-born guide had built a reputation as one of the most knowledgeable walking safari leaders in Kenya. She had come to Tsavo 5 years earlier, drawn by its vast, untamed landscapes and relatively low tourist numbers compared to the more famous Masai Mara. This morning, she was scheduled to lead a short walking safari for two American tourists, David and Rebecca Thornton, a couple in their 50s celebrating their 25th wedding anniversary. They had specifically requested Elise after reading glowing reviews of her knowledge and professionalism. Over breakfast at the camp's open-air dining area, Elise briefed the couple on what to expect. David asked about predators. Elise reassured them that lions and leopards generally rest during the day and avoid humans when possible. They would have a ranger with a rifle accompanying them as a precaution. But the greatest danger on a walking safari isn't from predators, but from a Cape buffalo. They're responsible for more human deaths in Africa than any other large animal. But she assured them that they would keep a safe distance if they encountered any. They move in herds, so they're easier to spot. The Cape buffalo, often called the Black Death or the Widowmaker by African hunters, can weigh up to 1,900 pounds and have massive horns that span up to 5 feet. Considered one of Africa's most dangerous animals, Cape buffalo don't flee from humans but actively stalk and ambush perceived threats. With exceptional memory, they've been known to track and attack hunters who wounded them days earlier. After breakfast, the small group gathered at the camp entrance. Joining them was Kimani, a Kenya Wildlife Service ranger armed with a rifle. He had worked with Elise many times before. They went eastward, the sun climbing higher in the cloudless sky. The heat was building, but a persistent breeze made it comfortable enough. About an hour into their walk, they crested a small rise and were rewarded with a spectacular view. A herd of zebra grazing alongside a group of impala, with 3 towering giraffes browsing on acacia trees in the background. For nearly 20 minutes, they observed the peaceful scene. As they prepared to move on, Kimani pointed to their right, about 300 meters away, a lone Cape buffalo. Elise studied the buffalo through her binoculars. It appeared calm, methodically cropping the grass with no signs of agitation. It was unusual to see a buffalo alone, but sometimes older bulls were forced out of the herd by younger, stronger males. Elise concluded that they were fine. They would continue on their planned route, which would take them away from the buffalo, now moving at a slightly brisker pace and maintaining a wide berth around the buffalo. Elise kept glancing in its direction, monitoring its behavior. What she couldn't know, what no one could know without closer inspection, was that this particular buffalo wasn't simply an old bull enjoying a solitary meal. It had been injured several days earlier in a fight with a rival, suffering a deep gore wound in its flank that was now infected and causing significant pain. The injury had forced it away from its herd, and the constant discomfort had made it unusually irritable and unpredictable. Injured animals are more dangerous to humans as pain increases aggression. For social animals like Cape buffalo, isolation from the herd adds stress, making them more prone to unprovoked attacks. As the safari group continued along their path, the distance between them and the buffalo gradually decreased. The animal raised its head, finally noticing the humans about 200 meters away. Its ears flicked forward, a subtle warning sign that Elise immediately recognized. She quietly told the Thorntons to move a bit faster and angle more to the left, away from the buffalo. They adjusted their course, but it was already too late. The animal suddenly lowered its head and began to charge. A charging buffalo can reach speeds of 35 miles per hour, faster than any human can run. More importantly, they can maintain this speed over considerable distances, unlike predators like lions that rely on short bursts of acceleration. Once a buffalo commits to a charge, it rarely breaks off the attack until the threat is eliminated or it becomes physically unable to continue. Elise saw it coming. She made a fast decision, telling everyone to run. The Thorntons sprinted away from the danger. Kimani raised his rifle, but the buffalo was moving too fast, the distance closing rapidly. Instead of running, Elise moved in the opposite direction, waving her arms and shouting to draw the buffalo's attention away from her clients. The enraged animal swerved toward her, its massive head lowered, the deadly horns aimed directly at her torso. Elise tried to dodge at the last moment, a move that had saved her once before during a close encounter with a black rhino. But the buffalo anticipated her movement with uncanny precision. The impact was devastating. One horn caught Elise squarely in the abdomen, penetrating deeply before the buffalo lifted its head in a violent upward motion, launching her body into the air as if she weighed nothing. She landed heavily several meters away, the breath knocked from her lungs, a searing pain spreading through her core. Kimani fired his rifle, the shot echoing across the savannah. The bullet struck the buffalo's shoulder but failed to reach vital organs. The ranger fired again, this time hitting the animal in the neck. Kimani managed to fire a third shot at point-blank range before diving behind a fallen tree. This final bullet found its mark, and the massive beast collapsed. He shouted for the Thorntons to stay where they were as he needed to radio for help. But help, when it came, arrived too late for Elise Van Wyck. By the time the emergency response team reached them in a patrol vehicle, she had already succumbed to massive internal bleeding. Her final conscious act had been to squeeze Kamari's hand and whisper that the animals are worth it. Always worth it. The Thorntons were physically unharmed but deeply traumatized. In the aftermath, Tsavo East National Park implemented additional training for walking safari guides, emphasizing the importance of recognizing signs of injury or distress in potentially dangerous animals. October 26, 2003 was a warm spring day in South Africa's Northwest Province. In Pilanesberg Game Reserve, the sun filtered through acacia branches, casting slow-moving shadows across gravel roads and tall grass. The air buzzed faintly with insects. From a distance, the bush looked calm, timeless almost. But beneath the stillness, the ecosystem pulsed with quiet tension. It was a typical afternoon in the reserve until one man stepped out of the car. Javier Cadenas had arrived in South Africa 4 days earlier. At 29, he was a marketing analyst from Madrid, soft-spoken and well-read with a particular love for photography. This was his first trip to Africa, booked as part of a small group tour through Pilanesberg's rolling hills and volcanic ridges. He had brought 3 cameras, a journal, and the kind of excitement that makes tourists lean a little too far out of the window. He wasn't reckless by nature, just eager. And he wasn't alone. That day's game drive was led by Peter Ndlovu, a local freelance guide with years of experience but a reputation for being casual with the rules. His vehicle was a beige 4x4 with open sides and a loose canopy. No doors, just metal bars and canvas straps. The guests were a mix of ages and nationalities, scattered across 2 bench rows. Some had been on safaris before, others like Javier were seeing the wild for the first time. The group had already spotted impala, zebra, and a distant elephant bull, and now the heat was settling in, slowing everything down. In safari parks, lions often appear indifferent to vehicles. Years of coexistence have taught them that the shape, sound, and scent of a safari truck meant no threat and no opportunity. But that calm evaporates the moment a person breaks the frame of the vehicle. To a lion, the human shape outside the car is prey, not part of the landscape. They'd been driving for nearly an hour when someone pointed out a lion resting in the shade of a marula tree, its golden coat blending seamlessly with the dust. Its head was lifted just slightly, eyes half closed, tail flicking lazily. Nearby, a second lion, likely a female, lay pressed against the roots. Peter brought the vehicle to a slow stop about 30 feet away, and cameras quietly emerged as the group settled into a hushed stillness. It was the kind of moment safaris are built around. Javier, eager for a better shot, had already leaned across the side rail twice, frustrated by the glare. Then, without a word, he unlatched the canvas strap, slipped past the metal bar, and stepped onto the ground. Camera in hand, eyes fixed on the lion. It was a baffling decision. Everyone had heard the rules. The lion was just 30 feet away, fully alert and within striking range. But safaris have a strange way of dulling instincts. The longer the animals stay still, the more harmless they seem. For reasons no one could explain, Javier, usually thoughtful, even cautious, chose the worst possible moment to act like the rules didn't apply. Gasps rippled through the group. One woman reached for him, another shouted. Peter turned, clearly caught off guard, but didn't react quickly enough. The lion rose in a single fluid motion and began to approach. Slowly at first, then faster. By the time Peter shouted, the lion was already halfway there. Javier turned, lifting his camera as if to retreat, but he never got the chance. The lion lunged with explosive force, slamming into his chest and driving him backward onto the dirt. Its jaws clamped around his neck, crushing bone and tearing deep into muscle in a single devastating bite. The attack was swift and silent. Within seconds, Javier stopped moving. One hand remained curled around his camera strap. The lion held its grip a moment longer, then released and stepped back, watching. Its tail flicked once more before it turned and walked calmly toward the shade of the tree. Javier lay motionless on the ground, blood soaking into the dust beneath him. By the time rangers arrived, there was nothing left to do. He was pronounced dead on sight, the injuries catastrophic. His windpipe crushed, artery severed, cervical vertebrae shattered. Rangers formed a perimeter around the scene and quietly escorted the group back to the lodge. Park officials opened an internal interview that same afternoon. Peter was found negligent. While no criminal charges were filed, his guiding license was revoked and he was removed from the reserve's list of approved operators. New policies were quietly introduced, mandatory safety briefings at the start of each drive, reinforced signage inside all safari vehicles, and an updated code of conduct for guides. The new rules were clear. No standing, no leaning out, and under no circumstances was any guest allowed to step out of a vehicle. Javier's body was flown back to Madrid a few days later. His family thanked the park staff for their help. A small service was held in his hometown where friends gathered to share memories, many of them centered around his photos, city streets, mountain trails, family vacations. In places like Pilanesberg, the wild doesn't offer second chances. All it takes is a few steps in the wrong direction and the illusion of safety disappears. On the morning of September 17, 2022, the sun rose hard and fast over southern Luanga National Park, washing the valley in golden heat before the shadows had time to settle. The dry season was in full force. Water scarce, brush brittle, and visibility stretched wide across the parched land. It looked peaceful, but in this part of Zambia, even the clearest morning can hide something waiting in the tall grass. 10 longtime friends from Seattle had flown in for what they called their Year 50 trip, a group walking safari through the park, something they'd talked about for years. They were all between 40 and 55, mostly professionals, nature lovers, and old college classmates who had stayed in touch across decades of jobs and children and distance. Among them was 45-year-old Brian McCready, a former EMT turned high school science teacher who loved hiking, wildlife, and cracking dry jokes that made his friends groan. And beside him on the trail was Sandra Wright, 43, a corporate trainer and avid runner who had known Brian since they were both RAs in college. She was the one who convinced him to join the trip in the first place. Leading the group was Thomas Banda, a seasoned Zambian ranger with 18 years of experience guiding walking safaris through the Luwanga floodplains. Known for his calm presence and deep knowledge of animal behavior, Thomas had spent years tracking lion prides and elephant herds, navigating the park's shifting terrain with methodical precision. Walking safaris were built on slowness and trust. Trust in the ranger, in the silence, and in the discipline to stay close and stay alert. The group set out just after sunrise, walking single file along a dry riverbed where hippo tracks etched patterns in the dirt. Rifles were carried only by Thomas and his assistant. The rest carried water, cameras, and the easy excitement of being surrounded by real wilderness. After an hour, they spotted a small herd of elephants in the distance, gray silhouettes moving gently across the haze. A few group members trying to get a better look stepped slightly off the trail. It wasn't far, 10, maybe 15 feet, but in the bush, that's all it takes. Thomas signaled for them to stop and regroup, but in those few scattered moments, the line had widened and visibility had broken. From the thicket, a Cape buffalo exploded into view, a massive, dark-bodied bull covered in dust and shadow. It was barely 20 feet from the group when it charged, hooves pounding, head low. Thomas shouted as the line broke apart, but Brian, closest to the brush, was still turning when the buffalo hit him. Cape buffalo are among the most dangerous animals in Africa, and lone bulls like this one, often referred to as Daga boys, are especially unpredictable. Once separated from the herd, they become more territorial and more likely to attack without warning. Weighing up to 1,800 pounds and capable of charging at over 30 miles per hour, they've earned a reputation for silent, sudden violence. They don't growl, they don't bluff, they wait, and then they strike. The horn caught him just below the ribs, lifting him off his feet before driving him to the ground. The buffalo wheeled and trampled him twice in a blur of hooves and dust. Sandra, just steps behind, was thrown aside by the animal's flank. She landed hard, her arm snapping with the impact. The rest of the group froze in place, stunned and unable to move. Thomas fired a warning shot into the air. The buffalo stopped, huffed, and vanished back into the brush. In the silence that followed, all that remained was the smell of crushed grass, the haze of dust, and the sound of Sandra crying out in pain. Brian's injuries were catastrophic. The buffalo's horn had torn through his chest, collapsing one lung and shattering ribs, while the trampling caused severe internal trauma. Thomas was first to reach him, followed by 2 members of the group who were trained in CPR. They worked together in the dust, doing everything they could while Thomas radioed for help. Sandra, still on the ground nearby with a broken arm, called out for someone to save him. But Brian never regained consciousness. The group stabilized Sandra's arm using strips of clothing and fashioned a stretcher from a folding chair and branches. She was in shock but alert. Thomas led them to a nearby clearing where a helicopter arrived within the hour to evacuate her and retrieve Brian's body. The attack was ruled a tragic accident, an unpredictable ambush caused by a brief lapse in spacing and visibility. Thomas wasn't at fault, but the tour company quietly revised its walking safari protocols. Stricter spacing, mandatory regrouping, and no off-trail deviations. Brian's body was flown home to Seattle the following week. His memorial filled the school auditorium where he'd taught for over a decade. Students, friends, and colleagues shared stories of camping trips, wildlife facts, and quiet kindness that few had ever known to name. His ashes were scattered in the Cascades along the trail he loved most. Sandra gave the final words at the service. She had survived, but she never forgot what it cost. The group ended their trip early and returned home subdued, the thrill of the wild replaced by something quieter. On November 12, 2021, dark clouds gathered over Tanzania's Ngorongoro Conservation Area as the short rainy season rolled in. For Anatoly and Elena Petrov, newlyweds from St. Petersburg, the growing storm didn't feel like a warning. It added an edge of wilderness to what was meant to be the most unforgettable journey of their lives. Just 10 days earlier, they had stood in a quiet chapel outside the city, exchanging vows after a 5-year relationship that had carried them through school, hardship, and success. Anatoly, 31, had built a modest tech empire in the wake of the 2017 Bitcoin boom. His charm was quick and unfiltered, and his energy often left people in his orbit breathless. Elena, 29, was precise and calm, a pediatric surgeon who had postponed this honeymoon 3 times to honor her surgical roster. The safari was Anatoly's dream, an escape into nature's raw beauty before settling back into careers and the quiet rhythms of married life. They'd chosen the most exclusive experience available, the Diamond Safari package from Tanzanian Luxury Expeditions. Everything had been arranged to perfection: private lodge, private guide, private vehicle, and a custom itinerary far from the usual tourist routes. The night before, they'd spent hours on the lodge veranda, stargazing over glasses of chilled Chardonnay and tracing their next day's path across a printed map. Anatoly had circled a remote valley known for black rhinos and Cape buffalo. Emmanuel Mkapa, their veteran guide of 15 years, had reviewed the route with them the following morning over breakfast. He'd noticed the sky turning gray at dawn and had hesitated when they discussed the western trails. Steeper, narrower, and more sensitive to rain. But Anatoly had pressed, eager to photograph animals others rarely saw, and Elena had agreed, moved by his enthusiasm and reassured by Emmanuel's confidence behind the wheel. By mid-morning, they'd driven deep into the reserve. The vehicle, a reinforced Land Rover Defender with custom suspension and all-terrain tires, handled the uneven terrain with ease. The first hours were everything they had hoped for. They saw a serval cat stalking silently through the tall grass and caught a rare glimpse of a pangolin emerging from under a tree trunk. A black rhino stood silhouetted on a ridge as if posing for them. Elena leaned into Anatoly's shoulder, her expression lit with awe. Anatoly's camera clicked furiously as he narrated every moment into his own memory. As the clock neared 11:30 a.m., a shift came suddenly. The clouds thickened into a dark ceiling overhead, the wind picked up. A few heavy drops landed on the Defender's windshield, then turned into sheets of rain as a thunderclap rolled across the crater basin. Emmanuel, watching the change with growing unease, tapped his phone screen repeatedly, scanning radar maps. The storm was moving in faster than forecast had predicted. He advised a return. Routes would soon become unstable. Anatoly had asked if there might be time for one last stop. The Buffalo Valley he had marked on the map was just ahead and technically closer than the drive back. Emmanuel relented but warned that if conditions worsened, they'd have to turn around immediately. 15 minutes later, the road beneath them began to transform. The dusty trail turned slick, a thick sludge of red mud. The Defender's tires lost traction on mild slopes and visibility shrank beneath the curtain of falling rain. As they crept forward, the path narrowed, flanked on one side by rising terrain and on the other by a steep drop into a ravine choked with scrub and broken rock. Emmanuel scanned for a safe spot to turn back. He found a slight opening in the brush. a tight curve with barely enough room to maneuver the vehicle, and began to guide the defender through a slow pivot. The slope beneath them, softened by rain, had already started to give way. As the front tires began to straighten, the ground under the right side collapsed. The defender tipped suddenly, the world outside tilting with it. Emmanuel fought the steering wheel instinctively, attempting to pull the vehicle back to level ground, but the Land Rover's weight shifted and momentum took hold. With a groan of metal and a hiss of wet mud, the vehicle slid sideways off the trail and began a rapid descent down the slope. Inside the cabin, Elena gripped Anatoly's hand with white-knuckled panic. He reached across her, instinctively bracing her body, but they were already beyond control. The first impact jolted the vehicle sideways into a hidden boulder, launching it into a barrel roll. The roof crumpled as they flipped. Seatbelt strained, shards of glass burst inward. On the second rotation, Anatoly's head struck the doorframe with catastrophic force. The angle of the impact snapped his neck instantly. When the defender finally landed at the bottom of the ravine, it came to rest upside down, partially submerged in the water, rushing through the thickening storm runoff. Rain thudded against the battered undercarriage as steam hissed from the cracked engine. Elena opened her eyes to a distorted world of blood, metal, and rain. Her forehead throbbed, warmth spilling down into her right eye. Her left arm was limp, broken, and pinned under the center console. She turned and found Anatoly slumped to the side, his neck twisted unnaturally, his expression blank. She stared for a moment, disbelieving. Then something deep in her chest fractured as the truth settled in. The rising water began to lap against her waist. She freed herself with her uninjured arm, gasping as each movement sent bolts of pain through her body. With desperate effort, she dragged herself across the inverted cabin, kicking glass away from a shattered window. Her right leg caught the edge of the frame, slicing it open, but she didn't stop. She pulled herself out into the ravine, collapsing beside the wreckage in the mud, sobbing from pain and loss. Minutes passed, maybe more. She finally gathered enough strength to crawl to a fallen tree trunk and leaned against it, shaking uncontrollably. The stream that had been a trickle was now swelling, turning the base of the ravine into a shallow flood. Then she noticed movement across the water. Dark, slow-moving shapes emerged from the mist, at first unrecognizable through the rain and her half-blurred vision. But soon they took form. A herd of Cape buffalo, their shoulders heavy and slick with rain, pushed forward from the bush, moving toward the stream. Elena remained frozen against the tree, remembering Emmanuel's warnings. Buffalo were unpredictable, territorial, and highly reactive to perceived threats. The lead bull, massive and scarred from past battles, stopped at the edge of the water. He sniffed the air, lifting his nose. His gaze swept the ravine, landing directly on her. Elena tried to quiet her breathing, bury the moan rising from her ribs. But her body betrayed her. A gasp of pain escaped, too loud, too human. The bull's head snapped toward her, eyes locking onto the source of the sound. With terrifying precision, he stepped forward, then broke into a charge. The ground shook as he crossed the shallow water. Elena didn't move. She couldn't. The bull struck her midsection with full force, his horns lifting her off the ground and tossing her into the mud. Before she could process what had happened, he was on her again. Horns stabbing into her torso, hooves trampling her chest and shoulders, breaking bones with every impact. She faded quickly, her consciousness slipping away as the herd passed over her, indifferent and unrelenting. The search team found the wreckage the following morning. The Land Rover was buried halfway in the mud, its tires jutting skyward. Emmanuel's body remained strapped in the driver's seat, crushed against the steering wheel. Anatoly had been thrown partially through a broken window during the descent. Elena's remains were discovered farther downstream, her body bearing unmistakable trauma from horn strikes and trampling. The incident triggered a formal investigation by the Ngorongo Conservation Authority. It confirmed what Emmanuel's logs already showed. He had expressed concern about the forecast, but had proceeded with the couple's request to explore deeper trails. While technically within policy at the time, his decision to continue after the rain began was deemed a critical lapse in judgment. The route they took had a known history of slope erosion during wet conditions. Tanzanian luxury expeditions responded by overhauling its weather protocols, banning off-trail excursions during the rainy season, and requiring real-time terrain monitoring for all private safaris. Emergency response standards were tightened, and access to Western Rim trails was partially restricted until further notice. Back in St. Petersburg, the Petrovs' funeral drew hundreds. Photos from the days before the accident of a smiling couple beneath acacia trees, of a camera focused on a black rhino, stood behind two closed caskets. Their story echoed across continents as a reminder that even in paradise, danger can hide in a single decision. One route, one wrong call, and the wild does not give second chances. Want to watch more types of these videos? Click on your screen now. Thanks for watching.